There's a specific kind of silence that tells you something's wrong. The kind where a six-time major champion, a man who gave this sport some of its most iconic Sunday moments, simply vanishes. No retirement announcement, no farewell, just gone. Phil Mickelson has not played a single major in 2026. Not the Masters, not the PGA Championship, not the US Open, not the Open Championship, all four. An entire year of majors, erased from his schedule. For the man who became the oldest major winner in history at age 50, that is not a footnote. That is a collapse. But missing tournaments is only the surface of this story, because while Phil was disappearing from leaderboards, something else was unraveling. Something that started leaking out in early June, then exploded on June 26th, when one of golf's most feared investigative journalists published a report built on 19 sources. What that report revealed, and what it means for Phil's marriage, his career, and his legacy, is the real reason you clicked on this video. And then there's Amy. Amy Mickelson did not go on television. She did not post a single word on social media. But this week, she broke her silence. And what she said is the part of this story that will genuinely stop you. Honestly, watching this unfold, I believe this is the most devastating fall from grace the golf world has ever witnessed. Do you agree? Or do you think Phil still has a path forward? Drop your take in the comments. And if you follow PGA Tour stories like this one, subscribe. This channel covers exactly this. Now, let's talk about what actually happened. Phil Mickelson's last real competitive moment came at LIV Golf South Africa earlier this year, tied 48th, barely mentioned, gone before the weekend conversation even started. For a man who once commanded every leaderboard he appeared on, that result was not just bad golf. That was a warning sign most people missed. Right after that tournament, a quiet Instagram post appeared, a vague reference to a private family health matter. No details, no timeline. Just Phil stepping back with no explanation that actually explained anything. Then the Masters came. Phil wasn't there. The PGA Championship field briefly carried his name, and within hours, the PGA of America confirmed his withdrawal. The US Open exemption from his 2021 win had expired. The USGA offered no special invitation. The Open at Royal Birkdale, withdrawn by June 18th. Every single major, one after another, gone. Golf fans who followed Phil for 2 decades started feeling that quiet, unsettling dread that something was seriously wrong. Not just physically, not just a slump, something deeper. And the longer the silence stretched, the heavier it became. No updates, no sightings at tournaments, no candid photos from a practice round. For a man who had been one of the most visible personalities in professional golf for 30 years, the absence itself became a story. People who had watched Phil since the early 90s began quietly asking each other the same question. Not when is he coming back, but what is actually going on. The Farms wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment the walls finally stopped holding. Alan Shipnuck has spent years building a reputation as the journalist in golf who doesn't look away. He wrote the unauthorized biography of Phil Mickelson. So when Shipnuck publishes something built on 19 sources, the golf world doesn't scroll past it. On June 26th, he published exactly that. What the report revealed wasn't one incident at one club, a pattern stretching back more than a decade across multiple private golf clubs, multiple women, and multiple situations Phil's team had quietly managed to keep out of public sight. The Farms Golf Club was actually the 3rd club in recent years where Phil's membership ended abruptly. Before that came the Bridges in Rancho Santa Fe. Before that, the Madison Club. Each departure carried the same fingerprints. Each one ended without a full public explanation. At the Madison Club, sources confirmed something that reframes the entire timeline. Phil was regularly having a woman who was not his wife spend nights at his private condo on the property. When Amy found out, she made the decision. Phil would no longer hold membership. The property would be sold. A senior management member confirmed it simply. It wasn't necessarily that he was kicked out. It was more of a demand by Amy. Amy made the call, not Phil. Amy. That single detail changes how you read everything that came before it. And what came after. After 2015, people close to the family noticed Amy withdrawing from public appearances. She had always been present, at tournaments on the 18th green, through every major win. Then, gradually, she wasn't. Sources told Shipnuck that Phil's drinking had increased. The discipline that defined his career began showing cracks people around him could see but didn't discuss openly. Then there was Ashley Perez. wife of former PGA Tour player Pat Perez, one of Phil's longtime friends on tour. Ashley described a period leading up to 2015 where Phil had been sending her friendly texts that, looking back, felt like grooming. At a tournament dinner during the Barclays in 2015, Pat stepped away from the table. What Phil allegedly did in those minutes, showing Ashley an explicit photo and propositioning her directly, was something she chose not to tell Pat about immediately. She didn't want to distract him during the tournament. Pat eventually found out. On a podcast in 2022, he described what Phil had done as crossing a line that was uncrossable and unforgivable. Phil called to apologize. The conversation was recorded. In it, Phil admitted he was disgusted and embarrassed by his own behavior. His own words. Recorded. Confirmed. Ashley explained why she chose to speak publicly now. Her reason wasn't anger. It was something colder. There is a culture of silence that keeps women from coming forward. With Phil, you're dealing with an egotistical narcissist. Phil will keep going until he gets caught. She wasn't describing one mistake. She was describing a man who believed he never would be caught. Shipnuck's report included a second woman, unnamed, but someone who knew Phil through mutual friends. She described a dinner where Phil approached her with graphic and deeply inappropriate propositions, seemingly out of nowhere. Her words, something felt off. Out of nowhere, Phil started asking the most inappropriate questions. I was sweating profusely. It felt like verbal rape. Two women, two completely separate situations. Years apart, a former golf associate put it bluntly. Phil is a wild hyena. Amy tried to put him in a cage, but that was never going to work. Consider what that picture actually looks like when you step back from it. A man with one of the most recognizable faces in American sports. A man whose children grew up watching him compete in majors. A man whose wife stood on 18th greens in front of millions of viewers and celebrated alongside him. All while a completely separate version of Phil Mickelson existed in private clubs and closed circles. A version that the public never saw and that people close to him apparently felt powerless to stop. The gap between the public Phil and the private reality was wider than anyone watching from outside ever imagined. And what Amy did next is the part nobody saw coming. Through all of it, the clubs, the allegations, the gambling debts that became public years earlier, the LIV defection, the drinking, Amy Mickelson stayed. Through breast cancer in 2009, through near-fatal complications during childbirth in 2003, through every controversy that threatened to define Phil publicly, she stayed. And this week, for the first time in months of silence, Amy's words became public. She didn't appear on camera. No interview, no social media post. 4 sentences, released through Phil's legal team. 4 sentences that, read carefully, say far more than they appear to on the surface. The statement read, throughout their 35-year relationship, his wife, Amy Mickelson, has supported Mr. Mickelson and their family with extraordinary grace, unwavering love, and the belief that people are measured not only by their failures, but by what they do to make them right. Mr. Mickelson's priority is to become the husband, father, and man his family deserves. Right now, that means giving his full attention to a private family health matter. Phil's attorney added separately, recovery is not a straight line. Recovery, not rest, not a break. That word was not chosen carelessly. This is not a man waiting for the right moment to return to a leaderboard. This is a man in the middle of a reckoning. Now read Amy's words again without the surface meaning. People are measured not only by their failures, but by what they do to make them right. She is not defending him. She is not saying the allegations are false. She is saying he has failed, and the only question remaining is what he does next. The husband, father, and man his family deserves. He is not currently those things. His own team said it, in a statement they approved and released publicly. An extraordinary grace, the most heartbreaking phrase of all, because when you place it against everything the Shipnuck report revealed, the Madison Club, the condo, Amy making the call to sell the property, Amy quietly withdrawing from public life for years, you realize that grace was not given once. It was given repeatedly, at enormous personal cost, by a woman who clearly knew far more than the public ever suspected. As for the marriage itself, Amy has not filed for divorce. She has not issued any statement of separation. Every word released publicly places her still in the room, still present, still choosing to stand beside a man in the process of a very public reckoning. Whether that continues is something only Amy knows, but right now she is still there. And that choice, given everything now on the record, carries a weight most people watching from the outside will never fully understand. That is what breaking silence looks like when someone has been carrying this alone for years, and the path Phil walks from here is narrower than it has ever been. Live Golf is losing its Saudi backing after the 2026 season. The public investment fund is pulling financial support, ending more than $5 billion in funding for a league losing an estimated $75 million every month. The tour Phil burned his career to join is quietly running out of road. The PGA Tour's returning player program was described by multiple insiders as structured specifically in a way that excludes Phil. Not by name, by design. A former close friend in golf said it most clearly to Shipnuck. It's a very sad story. He should have been Arnold Palmer. Phil had the same charisma, the same star power. People loved him everywhere he went. Should have been. Past tense. From someone who was there and watched it happen. That is the weight of this story. Not just that Phil Mickelson made mistakes, the weight is that this was a pattern across years, across a marriage that absorbed far more than it ever should have, while Phil stood in the public eye as one of the most recognizable figures this sport has ever produced. He gave golf fans fist pumps and miracle shots and Sunday charges nobody believed were possible. He was lefty. He was beloved. And now Amy Mickelson is releasing statements through attorneys about grace and recovery and becoming the man his family deserves. That distance between who Phil was to the public and what was quietly happening behind closed doors is the most devastating part of this entire story. Not the scandal itself, not the clubs, not the individual allegations, the distance between the image and the reality. That is what makes this genuinely hard to sit with, because most people who watched Phil for decades genuinely believed in who they thought he was. Most golf fans watching this are feeling the same thing right now, not just shock, but genuine grief for what this sport lost. Do you think Phil Mickelson ever finds his way back, on the course or off it? Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely don't know the answer. And if this is the kind of story you want to follow as it develops, hit subscribe. This channel is brand new, and every subscriber right now is part of building something worth being part of. No retirement has been announced. No return timeline has been given. What happens next with Phil Mickelson is genuinely unknown. But the golf world he returns to, if he returns, will not be the one he left. The sport has moved on. The image of lefty, the one that lived in highlight reels and in the memory of every fan who watched him play, has been permanently complicated by everything now said publicly and on the record. Some legacies survive their worst chapters. The only person who determines which category Phil Mickelson falls into is Phil Mickelson. And based on everything we now know, the pattern, the recordings, the one word his own attorney chose publicly, the work that recovery requires is not the kind that happens on a driving range. It happens somewhere much harder than that.